Hello, good morning, and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that tells you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in less than 20 minutes, we promise.
That's right, my name is Sam Coates of Sky News, and with me is Jack Blanchard of Politico. After a whirlwind 36 hours overseas, the Prime Minister is now back in the country. He landed a little before 9 o'clock last night at Stansted, and he'll be up in front of MPs today for Prime Minister's questions.
Not just a whirlwind 36 hours for the Prime Minister, Sam, a whirlwind 36 hours for you, Sam Coates. I can see you back in your kitchen, Bob the cat at your side. It's a happy scene. How did you enjoy Azerbaijan? Is that a fun place to go for a day out with work?
It is actually an incredible location. I mean, it's a country run by a strong man where things like civil society and charities are not welcome, but that's exactly what was going on. It was a huge, great conference of world leaders and environmental activists and other charities, exactly of the sort that are perhaps not always given an open door in that country. Incredible sort of fusion of different countries, different cultures there. These summits are always incredibly long. You know, the day started at sort of 4 a.m. British time, and Keir Starmer eventually landed quite late at night. But you can see why the Prime Minister likes being on the world stage. At sort of lunchtime yesterday, he gave a press conference, and he walked in. It was quite a large room that was about a third full, to the sound of applause. It wasn't the journalists who were applauding, because journalists never do, but it was the ranks of NGOs, of people who'd come basically to say well done to the Prime Minister for announcing his climate target. He looked absolutely delighted, particularly when he saw the bemused look of journalists' faces as the clapping was happening behind him.
I saw your own bemused face pop up and ask not about climate targets, though, Sam, but about the departure of Justin Welby as Archbishop of Canterbury. You thought that was a bigger story in the end, right?
So on the plane on the way out, we asked Keir Starmer about the sort of scandal engulfing Justin Welby, and he gave a very curt reply. He just said it's a matter for the Church of England. So at the press conference yesterday, as kind of criticism was growing, but before he'd gone, I gave it another go at the press conference, and he gave a much, much more detailed and frankly aggressive answer, where he, said that his thoughts were the victims and it was all appalling. He didn't call for Justin Welby to go, but he sort of notched up many, many levels the degree of seriousness about which he was talking. And I have to say, Jack, in retrospect, that was a clue to what's going on, because the Archbishop of Canterbury, I think by that stage, had already resigned to the King. And the fibre optic cables between Buckingham Palace and Downing Street are kind of flawless. And I suspect, actually, in that press conference, as he was answering my questions, he already knew that Justin Welby would be stepping down just a couple of hours hence. So when the Prime Minister talks about things that, the monarch will already know about, he has a bit of prior knowledge, which is why he was so sharply different in his response on Tuesday to the one that we got on Monday.
But he doesn't actually have to pick the new one, is that right? When the new Archbishop arrives, that's not his job?
And I think this will be a bit of relief for the avowedly atheist Keir Starmer. Yes, one job that he doesn't have to worry about is that. Up until the time that Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, the Prime Minister used to get two names from a commission and could choose either of them to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. So it's a pretty big job for a Prime Minister, pretty odd role, frankly, for the person in number 10 to do, to have to pick the head of the Church of England. But Gordon Brown, as part of his plan to give what he called operational independence back to the Church of England, gave up that role. So now what happens is Keir Starmer only has to appoint the chair of a committee, the Crown Nominations Committee. He's got to find an Anglican, preferably one that's quite high profile, who will chair that committee, that will then give him back one name that he will hand to the King, and that will be the next Archbishop of Canterbury.
All right, the departure of the Archbishop of Canterbury, unsurprisingly, on many front pages this morning, but it's not the main thing we need to talk about, Sam, because the big political story in the UK today is very much the NHS. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, is taking centre stage today. He's already out and about, as we're talking now at about 7:15 in the morning, doing broadcast interviews left, right and centre, and he is making a quote-unquote big speech at the NHS Providers Annual Conference in Liverpool. He'll be speaking at about 10:30 this morning, and he has got reforms to announce. This is the first big moment in Labour's NHS reform plan. We've heard the money was announced at the budget. We've seen the Darzai review, which was basically an assessment of how screwed the NHS already is, and now we get to the reform bit of the programme. This is not the only thing they're going to do, but it's the first big moment, I think it's fair to say, Sam, since Labour came to power in terms of changing the way the NHS works. And Wes Streeting is going to announce an NHS league tables of hospitals. It is the most Blairite day we've had so far since Labour came back to power. Anyone who's around in the 2000s remember how league tables were such a big part of Blairite reforms in terms of what he felt, Tony Blair felt, would drive improvement in public services through competition and a very public competition at that. So we're going to get NHS league tables of hospitals and other health trusts to try and, well, in the eyes of the government, to try and drive improvement and to show where areas are underperforming. In the eyes of already worried NHS bosses, Sam, naming and shaming areas that are not doing well. And Wes Streeting is not going to duck this challenge. He's literally going to make this announcement at a summit of 800 NHS leaders this morning. He's going to stand there and tell them we're going to out you if your hospital or the trust that you're running is not doing well. So it's a big moment, I think, in terms of Labour's reform plan, Sam. But Wes Streeting not going to deliver the happiest message to NHS bosses this morning.
The other Blairite angle of this is that he's walking into the dragon's den in order to make the announcement that he's curbing the dragon's powers. We haven't got a full outline of how this is going to work, but essentially all NHS trusts in England are going to be ranked by a series of performance metrics, and we don't quite know what those performance metrics are yet, but that will undoubtedly cause some squealing. There'll be complaints that you can't compare costs, for instance, because costs are different in different parts of the country. They'll say that there are different pressures in different parts of the country, but nevertheless, Wes Streeting thinks that it's fair enough to hold trusts to account by comparing one with another. There'll be a new system on bosses' pay, because at the moment, if your trust is just sort of doing more operations and procedures, you can get more money. I think Wes Streeting wants to add an element of kind of evaluation about just how well things are going into that. Good trusts were going to be given more control over their spending. Bad trusts might see managers removed, and there's going to be a sort of new clampdown on agency spending, which has been a problem in the NHS at the moment. Overall, it's a decent step, but it is just a first step, and it's not the biggest step that this government wants to do when it comes to the health service. The big reform package doesn't come until the spring of next year. There's still a review ongoing about exactly how Wes Streeting completes his plan to, in his words, take and move services from hospitals to communities. That's the biggie. How do you get more treatments, more preventative treatments, and more work done in kind of local hubs rather than in hospitals? And that is going to be the thing really that determines the success or otherwise of Wes Streeting's health review. This is a fight with NHS doctors, managers, and other staff that will be kind of high profile and noisy, and will generate some criticism. The only quibble around it is that actually this was done by Alan Milburn when he was health secretary back in the early 2000s, when Tony Blair was prime minister. Alan Milburn, who was of course back as chair of the sort of non-exec committee of the Department for Health. But it was also abandoned under Tony Blair in the second term of that parliament. And the reason it was abandoned is because the sort of watchdog back then thought that, you know, patients don't really have a choice in the NHS, and some of these comparative league tables just are a bit crude, and you couldn't really learn as much as they were hoping from them, and that the health service is fundamentally different to education, where league tables and the star rating system that we did have, and now the other data that Ofsted is going to provide does inform parents that can choose their kids' school. In the NHS, you go where your doctor refers, and so there isn't the same element of competition that is informed by these league tables. So it is a bit different. It has had a bumpy time in the past, but given just how much Keir Starmer, when he talks about it, talks about wanting to make NHS staff more involved and less unhappy with their work, not least because his wife works in the NHS. It's quite a different tone today from Wes Streeting.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's interesting to see some of the language around this that Wes Streeting is already using. Writing in the Times, our health service must attract top talent, be far more transparent to the public who pay for it, and be run as efficiently as global businesses. That sort of language of businesses around the NHS will instantly send shivers up the spine of the left members of the Labour Party, and indeed lots of people who work within the NHS who don't want to think of the NHS as a business at all. And it's interesting to see the reaction coming in from people within the NHS. I mean, look at the framing of this story in The Guardian, which is kind of like the Bible for lots of people who work in the NHS. Streeting's hospital league table plan riles NHS medics and bosses. They come in with their headline this morning. That is the way that is the treatment that it's going to receive. They're leading on the fury, as they put it, from NHS bosses and staff at being named and shamed in this way. And again, yes, making the point that league tables are a way of showing which trusts and which hospitals are apparently performing better or in more trouble than others. But as you say, most people don't get to choose which hospital they go to. Most people don't even live in an area where you could choose which hospital to go to. You go to your local hospital, and so discovering just how badly it's doing isn't necessarily a massive way of boosting patient confidence as you get shipped down there anyway to receive your treatment. As you say, it all feels very Alan Milburn, doesn't it? And I guess, maybe not surprising that if you bring back the guy that came up with this the first time, as you say, it got rolled back the first time, he may feel he has unfinished business to see through. And so it's coming back with a vengeance for people that work in the NHS.
There is another reform introduced by the Conservatives that's worth keeping an eye on, just telling us where Labour's heart is on NHS reform. And there are stories this morning, there's a story on the BBC, about physician associates. Now, these are far less qualified individuals who work in the NHS, who are not meant to substitute for doctors, but can carry out what they say is support doctors in the diagnosis and management of patients. And they're paid less and they're trained less, and so they're a lot cheaper. And there are a few thousand of them, and they are starting to perform roles all over the NHS. There's a creeping sense, and this is causing a lot of anger in the health service, is that they are starting to replace doctors and do some of the jobs that doctors are meant to do, in some cases illegally, because they don't have the qualifications. And there are quite high-profile examples where physician associates are going way beyond what they're allowed to do, simply because nurses are asking them mistakenly, thinking they're doctors, or trusts are overstretched. And one of the interesting things will be to watch, does Labour clamp down on them and make sure that they have a limited role, or just gently allow them to fill the gaps in an overstretched health service, even though that Labour have put in all this money? This story is running in parallel to Wes Streeting's reform speech today, but I'm sure he'll be asked about it. Watch his answer on that, because do you want people with a fraction of the qualifications sort of doing doctors' jobs, and do you want that to be expanded, or can there be safeguards around these people to make sure that they fulfil only the role that was originally intended? And is this effectively a health service on the cheap?
Yeah, well, lots of criticism around that from within the health service as well. What we don't yet know is where the Tories are on all of this stuff yet. Sam, we've got PMQs as the other main event happening in Westminster today at noon, whether Kemi Badenoch, the new leader of the opposition, decides to get involved in talking about NHS. Feels unlikely to me, but let's see. We've only got a few minutes left. Should we talk about Donald Trump? Because I feel contractually obliged to talk about Donald Trump on this podcast, given it's so interesting. It's only been a week since Donald Trump essentially won the US election. It feels like an awful lot more time than that. And overnight, in case you've missed this rather exciting news, you've probably heard it already, he has officially given Elon Musk, the tech zillionaire, a role in his government, running a department for government efficiency, or Doge. I don't even know how you pronounce this internet meme, but the whole thing reads like a Reddit thread gone wrong. But Elon Musk is going to be empowered to slash government spending which will be putting the willies up lots of people in Washington. However, probably more significant from a UK point of view and from a European point of view is Donald Trump has also announced his pick for US Defense Secretary, which is, of course, a massively important role to everyone in the West, given we're in the middle of multiple wars around the world. And it's fair to say that his pick for US Defense Secretary has rather taken people by surprise. He has not gone for an experienced politician. He has not gone for someone with Pentagon experience. He has gone for, check this, a Fox News host. This guy, we've got a great piece running on our, well, great's one word for it. We've got an interesting piece running on our website over in DC where the headline is "Who the F is this guy?", which is the defense world reacting to the appointment of Pete Hegseth as US Defense Secretary, although it hasn't obviously been confirmed yet, but that's the guy Donald Trump wants. He is an Army veteran, so he's served in the military. He's written a book about essentially how the US military went woke and how we need to change that, and how there's far too many constraints on US military personnel when they're trying to fight in overseas wars. He's been shouting angrily about this stuff on Fox News for years, and he is now about to be installed in the Pentagon to run the US military operation. And I think it's fair to say that that is the kind of appointment, Sam, that people have been rather worried about in Whitehall. You know, the thing that civil servants and indeed, frankly, politicians over here generally want is normality. They want to deal with experienced people who get what they see as the diplomatic norms and of international relations and indeed military operations. And I think it's fair to say this pick is not that. This is at the other end of the Trumpian scale. Someone off the telly who shouts about woke now running the US military, I think will strike a little bit of fear into the hearts of people in Whitehall.
I was looking at some of the reaction to it. Elizabeth Warren, the sort of left-wing Democrat, was saying a Fox and Friends weekend co-host is not qualified to be the Secretary of Defense. There's a glowing piece on the Fox News website about how their guy is probably heading for high office, but just the image of him standing next to John Healey, our Defense Secretary, just feels somewhat incongruous when the Middle East, Ukraine, and good knows what is facing us in the months to come.
Indeed, and the joy of doing a morning podcast is that we get to break all this exciting news to you, because the crazy news coming out of America every night, I suspect, will continue for many more days, weeks, months and years to come.
Just one thing to keep an eye on. I think the agenda is going to pivot in the last bit of the week towards the economy. Rachel Reeves giving a big speech at the Mansion House tomorrow. Just one story in the papers this morning that was breaking last night that's quite, I feel like, is quite worth keeping an eye on and potentially quite problematic for the government, is that the cost of mortgages has started creeping up. Even though the Bank of England reduced mortgage rates, reduced the interest rates last week, just the cost of borrowing is still rising on the mortgage markets, and those for homeowners, the cost of borrowing is creeping up again, which is not something I think that Rachel Reeves will want to see. Tomorrow's speech is all about how on earth you get pension funds in the UK to invest in more UK projects. Big review of pension funds coming out at the same time. So I think we will be talking about invest, grow for the back half of the week. But that's it for today. We will wrap it up there, and we will be back tomorrow.
All right, nice to see you all. Thanks for joining. See you in the morning.
Bye-bye.